Not a single sound. Yeah. So another quickie that you can either take as fuel if you're in the rim brake defense force, or if you're in the disc brake death squad, it might help you avoid some of that undesirable noise that we are plagued with from time to time. No denying that. So the noise I'm talking about today is that rubbing noise you get when you're out of the saddle. I think most of us disc brake users have had that noise some way or another. But in this video I want to cover just a really simple trick that requires no special tools to fix your disc rotors if they have become a bit warped or untrue. Untrue? You know what I mean. So I'm gonna do this inside so it's a bit easier to see. So to illustrate the problem, let's take a look at my front rotor and caliper. As you can see, the rotor is out of true to the degree that it's very close to both the left and the right brake pad. Believe it or not, I could ride this bike normally in the saddle without any brake rub at all, but as soon as I got out of the saddle, I got that dreaded rubbing noise. Normally there's enough margin for a little bit of flex, even if the rotor is a bit out of true, but in this case I didn't have any margins left at all, so that scraping noise was unavoidable. So the only tool I use for the actual truing of the rotor is something as simple as an adjustable wrench. Another tool or tip is to take a white piece of paper, put it underneath the bike below the caliper. That will help you see the rotor move better between the pads compared to if you have your bike against a darker floor or background. Before I take the wrench to the rotor though, I want to eliminate one other possible problem that could be an issue, especially if you're on 6-bolt rotors. And that is to make sure that the hub and rotor interface is nice and clean. I think as long as everything was clean during the install in the first place, the risk is pretty small that something had got in between there, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. I don't know if the stuff you can see on my rotor bolts here are just dried up Loctite or actual corrosion, but it's a good reminder to look over your bolts from time to time. I cleaned everything up and I decided to go with anti-seize instead of Loctite this time. The rotor and the shims back on, but in the end that didn't affect the rotor tracking, so it was time to do some truing. So with the wheel back in the fork, I undid the caliper bolts so I could move the caliper slightly. I moved it just enough so I could get an audible rub on one side of the caliper. I spun the wheel again, stopped the wheel at the point of contact, took a note of roughly where on the rotor that rubbing point was, and then put my adjustable wrench to work. So I was careful to put the wrench just deep enough over the brake track. I didn't want the hard edge of the wrench where the pads go. I hope that makes sense. Then I just slightly bent the rotor in the opposite direction of where the rub was. And I'm not putting in much force at all. If you imagine the caliper at 12 o'clock, I put the wrench around 9:30 or 10. That way I wouldn't bend the rotor too much, since the caliper would kind of act like a stop almost. It's hard to convey how much force you should use, but for me it just felt like I put a light flex on the rotor, so better to be gentle and repeat many times rather than doing one Hulk-like effort. Yeah, like that will never happen. So after each time I spun the wheel to see if there was any difference. If not, I repeated the same thing again with a bit more force, spun the wheel, repeat until I didn't hear that rub anymore. Then I just centered the caliper to see how much margin I had on both sides. I wasn't quite happy here, so I did a few more bends until I got to this result, which I thought would be straight enough for me. Then it's all about getting that caliper dead center again. You could do the simple pull the brake and tighten the bolts, or use something like a disc rotor alignment tool. In this case, I just did it by eye since it was pretty easy to see with the video lights rigged up. That was a simpler job than I actually expected it to be, and all it took was this simple $5 adjustable wrench. There are a lot of specialty tools available, and by all means I'm not the one to advocate against more bike tools, but I still haven't felt the need to go for those personally. I would imagine they would make this job even easier though. Thanks to Johannes Nielsen, who gave me this tip in the comments. I think it was almost a year ago now. It came handy in the end. So that's it. It's a pretty simple fix, and just remember not to use too much force. I know we have an abundance of muscle in our upper bodies, or maybe not. I would recommend doing a shorter ride after you do this, and bring your wrench with you out on the road, just in case something doesn't really work as good as you thought it would. I had to do a few adjustments out on the road today, but now it's spinning just about as straight as I can get it, and I'm happy with that. Like I said, it doesn't have to be absolutely 100% straight. As long as you have a bit of margin on both sides of that rotor, it shouldn't be any problems. Hopefully the disc brake tech will improve with time, so we don't have to mess around with this so much. God damn, there's a lot of mosquitoes. It can only get better from here, right? It's funny though, just a couple of videos ago I was raving over how happy I've been with these rotors, and this happened. How it happened, I have no clue actually, but shit happens. You can either complain about it or deal with it. If you have other noise problems with the disc brakes, I've done a few videos on sticky pistons and contaminated disc brakes and stuff like that, so we'll link them in the description as well. And I think that's it for today. So until next time, ride safe and keep those brake quiet. Catch you in the next one. Peace.